Did someone you know go out to buy cigarettes and then abandon their family? My daughter's mother unexpectedly fell pregnant. I hate the unexpectedly fell pregnant bit, but it's less complicated to say it that way. We weren't together long before, 8 months or so. We'd talked a lot about going traveling. She had done a little and wanted to take me to see all those cool places she had been, and we'd both go to see some new cool places together. Becoming a mother pretty much seemed like it was the end of the world for her. I tried to be optimistic, tried making up stories of how we'd be cool parents who traveled the world with our kid, and our kid would grow up with massively broad horizons. I don't know if she ever believed that could be a possibility, but eventually our daughter was born. Even now I don't know how to portray my daughter's mother as someone who just abandoned their child, but I'll cut it down a bit. There was no motherly instinct in her. Whether it wasn't there or she just didn't want to be a mother, I don't know. She had her life planned out and a baby messed it all up. After about 4 or 5 months of heartbreakingly never seeing any love for our daughter, I gave her the out she wanted. I said, "If you can't or won't be a mother, you know where the fricking door is." Within an hour, she had packed, called her sister to pick her up, and she left. At first it was tough to find a rhythm to our lives, but I have some good family who helped me a lot. I grew up the youngest of 4 boys, and I know nothing at all about little girls. At the beginning, every couple of months or so, I sent messages, emails, or Facebook messages. In 3 years, I never received a reply, not a word from her since the week she left. Eventually, I deleted her from my Facebook. After weeks of hurting and hoping she'd reply, her sister showed me a message telling her she wished I'd stop sending the messages. She said she just wants to forget it. It being her daughter. She often referred to her as it when she was pregnant since we avoided knowing the gender and even a few times when she was born until I flipped my crap about it. My daughter is 7 now and is happy and loved. I've kind of always skirted around the subject of mum with her. I went with the story that mummy lives far, far, far away and she wanted you to live here with me where you'd be loved and safe, which appeases her, among a few other fairy tale stories I told her like mummy is a fairy. She's pretty happy-go-lucky, which I hope she never grows out of, but there's going to come a time when she's going to want to know more. Incredibly tempting to go down the road of your mum's a selfish C-word, but that won't happen. About a year ago, I came to find out she has a little brother in either America or Canada now with a guy she met in New Zealand. I don't know what to think about that. I don't know whether it's karma or irony. Before I met her mum, I was a bit of a jerk, irresponsible, quick to run if the going got tough. In some respects, I can understand why she left and why others leave their kids. I was there, willing to change my plans for a child that she didn't want in that life. I gave her the option. I don't resent her taking it, but I'll always resent wanting to forget, though. My daughter's mother wanted to spend her life traveling rather than being a mother. Not mad at her, I'm doing as well as I can. Way to step up, my man. It's amazing the ways different parents can respond to the responsibility of parenthood. I've heard that some parents who initially feel nothing eventually grow into it, so maybe the mother should have stuck around, but at least this girl has one loving parent. My grandfather, who I've never met, walked out on my dad. I never really knew anything about him other than that he lived in Florida and chose favorites to the extreme. My dad has 9 brothers and sisters he left behind with my amazing grandmother, Rose. Who I call my grandfather is another amazing person named Jim. Jim worked at a casket company and listened to my grandmother's story one day at the bake shop, I think. After hearing it, he would send check after check to my grandmother offering to help, which my grandmother would never cash and just let build up. When he realized he wasn't losing any money from his bank account, he showed up at my grandmother's doorstep with another check and talked to her. He lived with her after that day until the day she sadly died. Jim is 90 years old and still kicking it. I love that man more than I can express in words. He took in 10 kids? My God, that man is a freaking saint. On my 6th birthday party, my birth mother packed up at the house and took me, my brother, and sister a few states away to stay with her brother. When we finally came back, we were living with her family and got to visit my dad in our old house. Seeing the small table and the thrown-in furniture used to resemble a memory of a house is still burnt into my soul, especially the image of my heartbroken dad sitting alone at the table when we left. The more I learn and look back at how my dad handled my birth mother being the worst of people, the more I love and appreciate him. Sucks that I spent so much time fighting with him growing up. I'm just looking around this group of stories to see if my dad's here, because I'd really like to hear his explanation. My real grandfather was a piece of work. I wouldn't say that he was a terrible person, but he was rough. He left my grandmother in the 50s with 5 kids and nothing. I know there are stories about him messing around during World War II with every woman he could find, and that there are probably a lot of half-siblings out there that nobody knows about. Well, I know my mum said they were all so poor growing up because the only income they had was their mum, my grandmother, doing things like secretarial work. The man I call Grandpa found her, loved her, and married her, and ended up with 5 kids because of it. And as a kid, I never even knew until I was older that he wasn't my real grandpa. He was the one who read stories with me. He actually read Harry Potter as an old man because he knew I'd read it and wanted to be able to talk to me about it. And he's the one who always had the Werther's candy for me. I loved that man. I miss him a lot now that he's gone. He's my reminder that anything can make a family as long as everyone cares about each other. No blood relations need be involved. Meanwhile, the only thing my real grandfather ever gave me was a washer and a dryer that are from the 90s that I brought after he died from his tiny little dirty trailer. I needed a washer and dryer, and my mum desperately needed to sell the stuff to have money to pay for his funeral. There's a lesson in this somewhere for people. My real grandpa married and divorced and remarried again and again. In the end, he died sad and lonely and angry with the world all by himself in a dirty little trailer. The man we call my grandpa died surrounded by his adopted family and his wife and even grandkids, who all loved him and mourned his loss something fierce. Whilst my parents divorced when I was 4, and possibly one of my earliest memories was my dad and his guitar case walking out of the first home I knew, this story is someone else's. I did a 6-month stint as a credit and debit card call center goon leading up to the end of last year. I enjoyed it, and as much of a cynical jerk as I may be, I love helping people. This particular one will stay with me forever. A woman called up asking me to update her title. It was listed as Mrs., and she informed me that she had been divorced some time ago. I offered my condolences and she stuttered somewhat, but thanked me, saying it was for the best. After a little bit of conversing, she ended up spilling her guts to me and explained that her husband had just up and ditched her and their son on fricking Christmas Eve. Just up and left without a word after 20-ish years of marriage. She had done some digging and he was in Southeast Asia doing a bunch of working girls and a whole load of substances at the same time. After revealing this to her son, the son started acting out, and I related to this. It kind of hit home, and I said that from my experience, he was 20 and I was the result of my dad walking, that the rebellion is anger and to not hate him for it. Just support and love him and give him the option of contact with his father. And so on and so forth. She was in tears by the end, apologizing profusely for going on a tangent and that it probably wasn't my job to deal with her crap. To which I replied, "You're a person before you're a customer, and sometimes we all just need someone to listen." She felt a lot better and went on her way, but ended the conversation saying she wished she'd never searched for her ex, as the truth hurt more than not knowing. People leave because of many reasons. Let them, lest you end up hurting yourself more. My mother went on a trip when I was 7. I remember asking my dad when she was coming back. She got in touch a few years after that, but it still hurt having to learn that she lied to me. I still don't have many good feelings about her. It's probably because I never really knew how to trust her after that. She still believes that she can have a big say in my life even after she left, even though she never helps my father with any bills. She acts like nothing ever happened, like she didn't betray my father and abandon me, and my brother, who was 4 at the time. She still tries to act like the doting mother by promising to help my father, but conveniently forgets to send money. And when she does send some cash, she never lets us forget it. I didn't just take off and leave. We both knew I was heading to another state to live for the remainder of our son's life. I set up child support before I left and have had my son every summer since I left. I decided to leave because I was too immature to raise him to be a functioning member of society. I messed up my life before he was even born and I didn't want him to follow me down that path. 16 years later, he now has a stable life with a brother and sister that he cares about. I'm very proud of everything they've accomplished. I took the easy way out and just ran away. Someday I'll sit him down and explain everything, but it might be too late. Admitting that you were in the wrong doesn't make this okay, but at least you owned it. It doesn't look like you had another family afterwards, so maybe you learned from your mistakes. I was the one who left. My mother wasn't the world's worst, but the substances were starting to become a major issue. My father had already left, and we saw him about once every couple of months. My mum always had a new boyfriend, and it was never a good one. I was growing very sick of the situation, and I knew that I had to get out of it. The only problem was that my little sister was stuck in the same boat. I was 11, and she was 3. In the middle of the night, I grabbed my little sister, a backpack of clothes for both of us, and my bicycle. I rode until I reached my grandma's house. It wasn't too far, about 25 miles. It felt like it took forever. My grandma took us in, and that's where we stayed. It's not that we didn't have a grandma before, but my mum had always refused to get treatment and accept help. My grandma would offer, my mum would get angry, and we'd be back out the door. This time was different. My grandma changed the locks in the morning. Mum was too hopped up on the substances and didn't wake up until around noon. Plenty of time to get things done. My grandma set up a bedroom for both of us, and when my mum finally woke that morning, she broke down. It was like she finally realized that something had to change. She finally entered treatment. Fast forward 18 years, my wonderful grandparents have passed away, but I have a respectable relationship with my mum. She's clean and runs her own cleaning business that makes ends meet. She just received her GED. My little sister is a semester away from graduating college, and she was the second person in my family to ever graduate high school. I was the first. I got an athletic scholarship and went to college. 2 master's degrees and a job, brand new house, and 2 awesome dogs later, and I'm the happiest guy in the world. I'm a teacher, and my experience has been what led to my success. I share pieces of it with my students, behavioral disorders, to let them know that everyone has a chance. Sometimes you just have to take it. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. My dad walked out on my family when I was about 4 years old. He left us for a woman who he'd been sleeping with to get crystal. I grew up hearing constant fighting in my house, but I remember that day. My mother sounded more terrified and desperate than I'd ever heard her before. I was sitting behind a chair in the living room, and I remember not liking how cold it was. Slamming doors, screaming. They came out and my dad just said he was leaving. I ran to him because I wanted to go too. He literally shut the door in my face and left. I remember the worst part about it was my mum sitting on the floor, sobbing. I sat on her lap and told her, "It'll be okay, Mummy. I love you." Seriously, I've always wanted to just shut that memory out. Blech. My grandfather left my dad and his family on my dad's first birthday. So now my dad hates his birthday and his family kinda hates him because they feel like it was his fault or something. My dad ended up getting an awesome stepdad and kept some contact with his biological dad. Both of them died within a few months of each other a few years ago. There was no funeral for my biological grandfather. My dad wasn't sad at all. When his stepdad died though, he gave the eulogy, and it's the only time I've ever seen my dad cry. My grandfather went out while my grandmother was in labor, and he never came back. She sent the cops looking for him and everything, and when they went to her house, he had left a note saying he got his secretary pregnant and he was leaving. He left her with no money, 4 kids, and having never worked in her life. My dad was the one she was giving birth to. He never met his father until he was called to my grandfather's deathbed a few years ago. When my dad walked into that hospital to see him, the witch who he had cheated with stepped in front of my dad before he went into the room, saying, "You aren't getting any money." My dad said, "Shut up. I just want to meet my father." She stepped aside. We walked in, and the old man saw us. His face changed expressions from plain to absolute terror. He began sobbing. Sobbing. How could he know it was his son, you ask? Because they looked like fricking identical twins. He barely sobbed out the words, "You look just like me." He tried to say, "I'm sorry," but my dad interrupted, saying, "I forgive you." This sounds like a scene from a movie, but it is the most precious memory I have of my dad. I've never seen my dad the same way again. He's my personal hero. How could he just forgive him? My dad never had a Christmas because of how poor they were. He did Boy Scouts alone. I just don't know how he forgave him. I don't get it. I can tell you how, because it's something I figured out maybe 5 years ago after dealing with an unresolved anger over my wife leaving me for one of my supposed best friends. Forgiveness is a gift you give yourself, not the person you're forgiving. Holding on to all that anger and pain just eats you up and rips your soul apart. Once you forgive the person, you start to heal the damage. Until then, it's just a scab over a festering wound. My father moved out when I was 7. He was going to visit his sick father, which might have been partially true as my grandfather on his side was sick and ended up passing away around that time. I was just really confused why my mother was crying when he said he was going to visit my grandpa. I found out why when he didn't come back. Last time I heard from him, he called me on my 9th birthday to tell me he wasn't going to pick me up that Friday for the weekends at his place that we usually have, because he was going to find a new house to live in and didn't want to bore me with paperwork. Anyway, I've never heard from him again. I wanted to comment because something actually happened regarding my father around 2 weeks ago. 3 weeks ago, a co-worker at my restaurant pulled me aside and told me she saw a guy with my last name who looked like me. My co-worker said he had asked the guy if he had a son named my name, and the man said he did, but he hadn't seen him in a long time. I kinda blew it off as a coincidence, but 2 weeks ago, the co-worker pulled me aside again and said the guy came back with a business card, asking to give the card to me, since he knew my co-worker worked with me. It was him. So now I have my father's cell number, work address, work numbers, and email. I'm not really sure if I'm going to call or email or not. He has the same handwriting as me. My mother was a working girl, alcoholic, and addicted to substances. She left when I was 3 and never came back. My father would tell me that she loved me very much but just wasn't ready or mature enough to have a child. He passed away when I was 16. When that happened, I was able to get in contact with my mother's sister, an aunt to me. She would hang out with me, but when I asked around my mother, she would beat around the bush and say that my mum didn't want me to see her the way she was. I hoped to graduate college and then see my mother to show her that I did good and be able to talk to her as an adult, but she died right before I turned 22. So I never got to ask her why, but it's easy enough to assume that when the party lifestyle has its hooks in you, those hooks are deep indeed and never really let go. This is a really sad story. I guess the best thing a person can do in this kind of situation is live long, live well, and use their experiences to make sure that their future loved ones never have any of the same questions growing up. My mum didn't really follow the gonna get cigs, be right back route. It was made very clear she was leaving because she was a mum and felt like my siblings and I robbed her of her youth. With that being said, I was 8 years old when it happened. There were warning signs that she was going down that path. She stopped taking care of her kids. We stopped going to school. For me, I was being bullied and it was better to not go than to go and be made a laughingstock. She stopped making food. She'd give us money to go to the convenience store or pork out on Twinkies or something junk food related. My dad was never home because he was working at a prison and often would pull long shifts, which actually gave my mum time to plan her escape. The internet was starting to become a big thing, so my mum was using it as a tool to find single, younger men and to get them to bring her youth back. She was in her early 30s. Anyway, eventually my dad got wind of something going on. It was actually the school that made him realize something was amiss. My mum didn't care about us not going to school, but made clear that should we leave and wander the neighborhood, we should run from people who would recognize us. Well, the principal went to see why we weren't in school. My mum apparently said we were at the park, and the principal, a really sweet lady, went looking. Sure enough, we were playing on the jungle gym, and my dad was called. Once that happened, the next thing I know, my mum was leaving. I remember I was in tears, and I just knew that I wasn't going to see her again. And I was right. 12 years went by. I went from depressed to resentful to accepting what had happened. I talked to her on Skype once, but that was really it. My grandmother had raised me, and when I turned 14, I immigrated to Canada, where I now reside. November of the 12th year she abandoned me, I found out she was dying of cancer, and it was only a matter of weeks before she would die. I hopped on a plane with my ex's mum, and I saw her. She was 42 when I saw her, and she looked like she was 70. Anyway, I spent a good 5 days with her. We didn't talk much. I was comforted by her presence, and she was comforted by mine. It broke my heart to leave her, but I had to go back to work. I'll never forget 3 things though. 1, she said I love you for the very first time. 2, she endured great physical pain to get downstairs to say goodbye to me. And finally, how she begged me not to leave her. She died not even a week after I got back. I'll always remember the time I spent with her as an adult and cherish that. I didn't go to see her to make things right or whatever. I'd learned by that point she had made mistakes, and dwelling on the why of it all was getting me nowhere. She left me as a sickly, soft-spoken, crying little girl and saw me for the first time before she died as a healthy, strong-willed adult. I got a package from my stepdad about a month later. Inside was a pearl necklace that I wear every day, and a picture of me from when I was 8 years old. With it, there was a small note about how she kept that picture with her all the time and would often wonder about me. My siblings had reached out to her, but I never did. She had recent pictures of them, but just this one tattered old photograph of me. It made me cry. I know that this was a long story, so I'll end it and say that in her case, she may have made some horrific mistakes, but in the end, she would have done anything to change what she did. But I also know that she needed to leave because she was ruining the lives of my siblings and I. I love my mum, and I always will. My cousin from an extended part of my family decided to disappear. At least, that's what my family tells me. In the late 90s and noughties, I spent a lot of time with him and his family in Greenville, South Carolina. They would also come up to North Carolina to visit us. I would like to think I was the closest person to him from the North Carolina side of the family. He's 1 year older than me and should be turning 25 or so soon. All was fine until his mother was diagnosed with a terminal illness. She fought for years and was as hard-nosed a fighter as I've ever seen. During this fight, his dad was diagnosed with lung cancer and died relatively soon afterwards. Eventually, his mother passed away as well, and my cousin was essentially on his own. My side of the family tried to keep in touch, and they thought of all people, I'd be the one he'd reach out to. I haven't heard from him since 2009, when I believe he was selling real estate in South Carolina. I've tried all social media to find him. I'm fairly certain he just wants to disappear. It worries me though, because what if that wasn't the case? I mean, I can definitely see that being his personality, but you never know. I know I've gone on a little rant here, but I knew him and his friends pretty well. I know they're the kind of people who are on Reddit. Surely one of them, and maybe even my cousin, will see this and know with certainty who I'm talking about. Chris, you don't have to get in touch or even have a friend let me know you're alright. I just wanted to let you know I've not forgotten about you and I miss you. When you subscribe, make sure to hit the bell to turn on notifications. Put the playlist on in the background to finish listening to all the stories, or if you want some vibey music to put on in the background, check out easymode. If you like Am I the Genius, give Am I the Jerk a shot. Everything linked in the description.